winter harbor. Colors rise like distant breathing, soft against the rim of the sleeping sea, a secret choir above the ice. Every shade leans into another, tender transitions of violet to jade, pale rose into silver smoked, as if the sky were learning to remember forgotten names of light. Your silhouette stands by the quiet shoreline, coat open to the salted wind, listening for rhythms hidden between the slow waves and the fragile stars. Electric piano chords fall like measured snow, minor shapes that blur the bar lines, holding space for questions that never quite resolve. The melody turns in modal circles, cool and patient, a lantern of sound that does not hurry, tracing arcs of color no map can contain. If phrases slide over brushstrokes, barely touching the ground, tasting each suspended moment before letting it drift away again. In this dim latitude of the heart, time loosens its careful stitching and slips into a different pulse. Half memory, half possibility, always shimmering at the edges. You speak in almost whispers, consonants soften like frost on glass, vowels stretching long and clear, carrying small truths across the chill distance between us. Above the moving sky keeps painting and erasing, listened and understood. Trembling mind, until even silence feels illuminated from within. When at last the final tone dissolves into the dark, no grand answer appears, only the gentle awareness that everything is quietly in motion. Even when we stand perfectly still. the white plateau, like a slow exhale, and for a moment everything seems fixed. Mountains sharp against the dark, snowfield still as held breath. Then almost shyly, color begins to unfurl above, blooming in translucent petals that stretch and curl across the sky. Never quite the same from one heartbeat to the next. Electric chords rise to meet this movement. Minor voicings layered in soft clusters that glow briefly before dissolving, like lanterns released into a high invisible river. Your voice enters on a narrow thread of airy and restrained, shaping a melody that opens gradually, phrase by phrase, mirroring the hesitant confidence of the growing light. Modal inflections nudge the tune into surprising curves, bypassing easy resolutions in favor of lingering on the delicate edge between doubt and wonder. The drums hover at the fringes, brushes sketching faint arcs that feel less like rhythm and more like the memory of rhythm, a suggestion rather than a demand. Overhead the luminous bloom thickens, pale greens deepening to saturated jade, hints of rose and violet weaving through, painting the snow with shifting shadows. You sing of changes too gentle to notice while they happen, only visible in hindsight, like seeing how far a flower has turned toward the sun by the end of the day. The bass traces slow, supportive lines beneath, a calm presence that allows the harmony to explore without fear of falling apart. As the piece drifts toward its final chorus, the sky seems to pulse with quiet resolve. No longer tentative, yet still unbearably tender. When the last notes finally fade, the bloom does not vanish. It merely thins into transparency, leaving the world exactly as it was, but somehow softly rearranged. where thoughts blur into weather. The northern sky opens like a slow-moving curtain, revealing drifting streams of color that feel oddly familiar, like a dream half remembered at noon. Electric piano tones suspended in the air, as if gravity had agreed to pause for a few quiet measures. Your voice, low and breath-laced, glides through the harmony with unhurried curiosity, tracing a melody that circles back on itself like someone pacing while lost in thought. Modal turns loose in the fabric of the progression, folding unexpected notes into the pattern, until the border between tension and rest becomes pleasantly unclear. The drums offer only the gentlest guidance, brushed whispers and distant cymbal glow, like the muted ticking of a clock in another room. Above, the wandering lights sway and twist, green melting into amethyst, then washing into a faint rosy haze, as though the sky were replaying old feelings in new colors. You sing of wishes left on windowsills, of small promises tucked into the corners of ordinary days, waiting for the right night to rise and shimmer. Below in long rounded shapes, grounding the reverie without breaking it, like a hand resting reassuringly on a shoulder in the dark. Each repetition of the theme deepens the trance, drawing the listener further into a landscape where memory, hope and light move at the same measured pace. When the final chord fades into the quiet, it leaves a lingering question in the air, gentle and unresolved, like a dream that refuses to end properly and instead chooses to glow, chooses to glow. Along the rocky shore, where dark water folds into itself with patient repetition, the night sky spills a slow, iridescent tide of color that never touches the sea, yet somehow stains every wave. Electric piano chords roll in gentle patterns, minor harmonies overlapping like small swells, each one leaving a faint shimmer before dissolving into the next. Your voice rises like mist above the surface, airy and intimate, carrying a melody that arcs in long, deliberate phrases, more like breathing than like speaking. Modal shifts curve the line away from predictable harbors, sending it along. Quiet inlets of harmony where the usual rules feel gracefully suspended. The drums contribute only the softest murmurs. Brush textures that mimic foam, hissing against stones, rhythmic but never insistent. Overhead, luminous bands drift and fall. Pale green pouring into smoky blue, then seeping into violet and almost white. A tide that flows without weight, flooding only the sky. You sing of emotions that change tint depending on the angle of memory, of feelings that never fully arrive, yet never manage to leave. Hovering just beyond the horizon of language, the bass moves like a thoughtful current beneath, guiding the harmony forward with slow, deliberate motions, ensuring the song never becomes entirely adrift. Each chorus returns like another wave, brushing the shore, similar yet subtly altered, carrying new colors stolen from somewhere farther out. When the final voicing stretches into silence, the listener is left with a sense that the tide is still moving, quietly repainting the night, whether anyone watches or not. The city thins out at the edge, where concrete gives way to rock and thawing snow. And above that fragile border, the night begins to dream in moving color. Electric piano patterns glimmer like distant windows. Minor chords voiced with deliberate gaps that let the cold air slip between the notes. Your voice, airy and understated, glides along the skyline, humming a melody that seems to remember a place it has never visited. Modal inflections tilt the tune away from expectations, steering soft phrases into side streets of harmony, where time feels wider, slower, almost horizontal. The drums appear as faint brush strokes, sketching a rhythm you feel more in your breathing than in your feet, while the cymbals glow like halos around each passing bar. Overhead bands of light drift above the quiet buildings, washing the rooftops in pale green and diluted gold. strong enough to tint the entire horizon. After dark, the bass walks in gentle, measured steps, never hurry, holding the ground steady as the harmony explores its own soft detours. Each return of the main progression feels like turning a familiar corner and seeing the sky repainted. The same city made different by the wandering glow. When the last chord hovers unresolved and finally melts into the hum of distant traffic, the listener is left with the sensation of having stood at the edge of something vast and kind, if only for a few slow minutes. Over the sleeping forest, where branches wear heavy coats of ice, the night sky lifts its curtain in slow motion. Strings of wandering lights swinging like lanterns in a windless hall. Electric piano chords ring out with a bell-like clarity. Minor shapes stacked in close voicings that shimmer against the stillness, scattering faint reflections across the frozen ground. Your voice rises from the lower register, airy yet firm, tracing a melody that feels like a path trodden carefully between tall, silent trees. Modal turns loose in the strict geometry of the harmony, letting certain notes linger too long. Bending time the way frost bends the edges of a leaf. The drums whisper underneath, brushes brushing in circular patterns like hands rubbing warmth into chilled fingers, more texture than pulse. Above, the luminous arcs sway slowly, green into violet into ghostly white, as if invisible hands were carrying delicate lamps through a cathedral made of air and darkness. You sing about fragile hopes preserved in ice, waiting for a season brave enough to thaw them. Yet the tone remains calm, almost serene, as though endurance could be its own quiet celebration. The bass moves in long, deliberate lines, anchoring the drifting harmonies, reminding the listener that even in the coldest light there is a center that does not freeze when the progression opens into endless way. Deep hours when streets are empty and windows forget to glow, the sky begins a private performance. Bands of colors sliding soundlessly across the dark like thoughts across a restless mind. An electric piano pattern, sparse and careful, taps out minor voicings that hang in the air longer than gravity should allow. Each chord a small room you hesitate to leave. Your voice enters from a distance, airy and low, as though carried by the same invisible wind that pulls a wandering light from one horizon to the other. Modal intervals bend the melody sideways, avoiding the obvious path, tracing slow arcs that feel like handwriting in a journal no one else will ever read. The drums stay close to silence, soft brushes kissing the snare in irregular pulses, like a heartbeat you only notice once the room has gone utterly still. Above, colors deepen from pale mint to heavy emerald, then melt into smoky indigo and bruised magenta. A silent spectrum unfolding without any need for applause. You sing of unvoiced questions, of messages that arrive without words, of the way a sky in motion can echo emotions you never learned how to pronounce. The bass surrounds everything in a warm, low halo, providing a floor for the harmony to float above without drifting completely away. Each repetition of the progression feels slightly different, as though the song itself were tilting toward some quiet revelation it will never fully reveal. Cluster of notes finally releases its hold and slips back into the dark. The silence that follows is so complete, it glows. sea becomes a sheet of black glass, and the horizon dissolves into mist. A slow bloom of wandering color rises, bending along the curve of the earth. Electric piano chords fall like careful footprints on a dark hallway. Minor shapes that flicker between certainty and question, never lingering too long on either side. Your voice drifts in at a whisper, low and breathy, pressing soft syllables against the edges of the harmony, as though testing the strength of the night. Thin trails of light sweep across the upper sky, sketching temporary bridges between distant stars, collapsing and reforming before the eye can decide what it has seen. The drums hover at the perimeter, little more than brush textures, like fingertips tracing circles on a fogged window, hinting at rhythm rather than declaring it. Modal passages unfold like tide charts written in a forgotten script, giving the melody permission to step sideways, to repeat, to hover over the same quiet thought. From new angles you sing about waiting without a clock, about standing at the edge of something unnamed, letting the slow movement of color mark the passing of invisible hours. The bass hums in long rounded tones, steady as a lighthouse that chooses to comfort rather than warn, wrapping the song in patient resonance as the peace unwinds. The sky grows bolder, streaks of pale gold and searing teal, lacing through the previous restraint, yet even that drama feels unusually gentle. When the final notes scatter like small shards of reflected moonlight, they leave behind a horizon that seems less like a border and more like an opening, clear and endlessly fragile. Far above the frost-bitten rooftops, the sky begins to murmur in color, a secret language written in moving ribbons no alphabet can hold. Electric piano tones rise like small clouds of breath, each minor chord a measured step on thin ice, careful yet strangely calm. Your vocal line enters as a pale trail of smoke, airy and low, sliding along the edges of the harmony instead of resting in its center. Modal turns open like side streets in an unfamiliar city, inviting the melody to wander without fear of getting lost, because here detours are the only true map. Soft brushes on the snare mimic distant footsteps in fresh snow, irregular yet comforting, while the cymbals glow like tiny halos around each shifting bar. Above everything, the moving lights stretch and fold, green into amber, into bruised blue. as if the sky were exhaling all the thoughts it never spoke aloud. You sing of quiet conversations that never needed words, the way a glance across a dim room can reveal entire winters of unspoken feeling. The bass looms gently underneath a slow, resonant heart that refuses to rush, holding the song in a steady, forgiving embrace. Each phrase ends not with period, but with ellipsis, a small suspension where possibility can bloom for one more beat. When the final voicing floats upward and the last overtone fades into the frozen air, the silence that remains feels charged, humming softly like a held breath, or like snow waiting for the first footprint at the edge of dawn. Midnight leans over the sleeping town, and distant hills dissolve into a single dark shoreline, while high above, bands of living color wander without a path. A low electric piano figure rock back and forth like a small boat on black water. Minor intervals, breathing in slow patterns that ignore the usual gravity of the bar. Your voice enters as a thin ribbon of air, almost transparent, sketching a melody that curls around each restless hue, refusing to land where habit expects. Cool green spill into muted turquoise, then into weary blue, and smoke violet. Every shift a quiet exhale that brushes the tops of the snow-laden trees. The drums barely exist, just soft whispers on the cymbals, like someone turning pages in a room you cannot see, keeping time for a story that has no timetable. Between phrases, the harmony opens in a modal space, a window without frame where any route might be taken and none must be chosen. You sing of drifting promises and unanchored wishes, not as drama but as small lanterns set upon a river, content to follow whatever current appears. The bass hum patient animal, warming the floor of the arrangement, tracing slow circles that make the wandering lines feel strangely safe. In the sky, the glowing patterns loosen further, abandoning symmetry, smearing across the stars as though the universe had decided to improvise in soft focus. When the final chord hangs unresolved and finally thins into silence, the room feels different, stretched slightly wider, as if the air itself has been tinted by the gentle unrest of all that moving light. In the hush of the winter harbor, colors rise like distant breathing, soft against the rim of the sleeping sea, a secret choir above the ice. Every shade leans into another, tender transitions of violet into jade, pale rose into silver smoke, as if the sky were learning to remember forgotten names of light. Your silhouette stands by the quiet shoreline, coat open to the salted wind, listening for rhythms hidden between the slow waves and the fragile stars. Electric piano chords fall like measured snow, minor shapes that blur the bar lines, holding space for questions that never quite resolve. The melody turns in modal circles, cool and patient, a lantern of sound that does not hurry, tracing arcs of color no map can contain. Ellie phrases slide over brush drums, barely touching the ground, tasting each suspended moment before letting it drift away again. In this dim latitude of the heart, time loosens its careful stitching and slips into a different pulse. Half memory, half possibility, always shimmering at the edges. You speak in almost whispers, consonants soften like frost on glass, vowels stretching long and clear, carrying small truths across the chill. Distance between us, above the moving sky, keeps painting when at last the final tone dissolves into the dark. No grand answer appears, only the gentle awareness that everything is quietly in motion, even when we stand perfectly still.